It was intended for the human to support the machine to support the human and working.
And AI means something different to anybody you talk to, which is wild.
This is AI or Die.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to AI or Die. We are having a very special episode where we're actually in person today. Everyone, welcome Brendan. Very happy to have him.
I'm happy to be here. Very happy to be here.
This is, I believe, episode 8 of the AI or Die podcast, which is very exciting. We actually had some folks approach us at a conference last week as listeners that they were big fans. So thank you to everybody who listens. And without further ado, let's get into the first topic. What is going on in our lives today? I think, Brendan, since you're our special guest today here in person, it'd be important to talk about what you got coming up next. Where are you going? What are you doing?
So I'm about to get picked up here very shortly to drive down to Asheville, North Carolina, where I'll be spending some time with the family. We're doing a nice little family reunion in a cabin down there, so that should be a good time. Take a little breather, and then heading out to Spain next week. So very excited for that. Going to be a good time. Spend some time in Barcelona. So nice summer vacations for me coming up here after a while not taking time off. So I'm pretty excited.
Seriously, he's kind of underplaying it. Brendan's actually going to be living in Barcelona for quite a long time.
Yeah, for a bit there. Well, my girlfriend's going back to school, so we'll kind of see how that goes and then hang out in Barcelona for a while.
It's going to be great. I actually just got back from Barcelona 2 weeks ago. My wife and I just went for like 4 days out there, and it is the most beautiful and just nice, like kind people, and just the most delicious food as well.
Food is so
you've
good.
been as well, right?
Yeah, I love Spain. Super beautiful. Tons of stuff, fun stuff to do. Great shopping. Lots of good fashion there.
Yeah, that was the first thing you asked me when I got back. You're like, did you do any shopping? I was like, food shopping. I didn't really go clothes shopping or anything like that. So
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so very excited for you. We wanted to squeeze in this podcast just for all the listeners out there because since he's in town, let's grab a room, let's do this in person. We've been doing the first 7 or so episodes virtually, so it's nice to finally get together between one firm in a way.
Between one firm.
Yeah.
This is episode 7.
This is episode 7. Okay, apologies to the listeners.
Did it again.
This is episode 7. It depends on how you count down the episodes. Episode 0 might have been the first episode instead of episode 1. Either way, we're cooking, we're pushing these out. I don't know when's the next time we're going to be able to do an in-person podcast like this.
Oh, we'll go to Spain.
Oh,
Yeah,
I like that
that'll
actually.
work.
Yes, next episode in Spain. That'd be a lot of fun.
AI or Die goes to Spain.
AI or Die, fully in Spanish as well. So you'll have an English translation for that episode too.
That would be rough.
So that's what's going on in your life, Brendan. Rehgan, I'd like to pass it over to you. What is going on in your life?
Yeah, so DCC, the Data Connect conference, was last week, and for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a conference that I've been running in Columbus since 2016, and we got pretty big this year, so I was super happy with how everything turned out. Speakers were phenomenal. We're going to talk about some of the topics that were covered during the event last week, and it was super fun. It's like my Christmas. I always say that, like it's like a big family reunion because the community is so tight and so close, and it's just like good vibes all the time. People just are very excited, talkative, supportive, and we get to talk about super fun topics. So we had 1,300 or 1,400 people.
Wow, that's huge.
At the event. And of course, I had some of the people that I respect the most in the industry show up and speak, and so that was really great to meet them, and we can talk about that. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, I'm the biggest fan of Chip Huey, and she was there. She actually did a book signing, and it was cool. You guys gave out like 100 books or something like that, so she could sign it too.
Yep, she has a book. I think it's through O'Reilly. It's Designing Machine Learning Systems. It's a fabulous book.
Very
I just
good,
called it out on the Super Data Science podcast with John as one of my favorite books. It's so good, and I think it's just because Brendan and I, if you've been listening, we have a background in MLOps. That's what we love. We've been spending a lot of our careers talking about it, and she just does a fabulous job of communicating the core concepts around MLOps, and she's written quite a few things about large language models in production as well. So yeah, she keynoted, which is amazing.
It's fantastic, and yeah, just being there, I'd never been to the conference before. It just the way it was set up, it was on multi-floors. They had a whole massive stage with screens and everything as well. You probably see it on LinkedIn if you go anywhere near like the AlignAI or the Women in Analytics LinkedIn profiles as well. Tons of energy. It was a fantastic conference, and I'm very, very proud that it was in Columbus. As just a Columbus native too. That was really good.
Yeah, I always get very confused faces by speakers and sometimes attendees. And
What,
I'm
it's
like,
in Columbus?
it's in Columbus,
Yeah.
you know, but hey, I mean, like I said, we've been running it here forever, so, yeah, it's been great. We had a lot of international folks that showed up. We signed tons of visa letters
Oh, yeah.
for people to come into the US for the event, so that was really fun.
Come out next year. I don't know if you have a date picked yet, but.
We do!
Oh, wow. Okay.
July 25th and 26th, 2024.
2024, July 25th, come out to Columbus, folks. You won't regret it.
Yeah, you won't.
Yeah. Okay, anything else going on? Besides the conference, I mean, that was huge, but anything else?
Are you hinting at something?
I don't know. Some news that's worth sharing with listeners, I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, I have a fiance now, so yes.
Can you just do a quick flash of the camera, just like the quick little, yeah. Congratulations. Hey, congratulations,
Do a
Ray.
quick zoom in
Congratulations.
on my face.
Quick zoom in on her
Yeah,
hand and her face.
that's
Yes.
great.
Recently engaged. We cannot wait. We hope, personally, we're invited to the wedding.
Oh my god.
If
Fingers
so,
crossed.
fingers
Yeah.
crossed. If so, we're gonna try and do a live podcast episode for the
Oh,
wedding as well.
stop
Just to do,
it.
just to do like while she's walking down the aisle in the
Right.
background, we're talking about data and data
That's
science and stuff
great.
like that too.
No, it'll be fun. It'll be so fun.
Very excited for you. Cannot wait for that wedding as well. And with that, I'm trying to think about things that are personally going on in my life is too. I think for us, we're having, because Brendan's in town, a bit of an all hands meeting on the AlignAI side of things too. So it's great just to be in person this week with each other. We're getting dinners, like we're having a lot of these whiteboard meetings together as well. So that's been great for me. My wife, she's a second grade teacher and she's going to be going back to school, starting school back up in just a couple weeks. So definitely savoring the last couple weeks where she's around and just hanging out around the house too. And then outside of that, just a ton of training that we're putting on, along with the product development efforts too that we're very excited about. But that's the other side of things. This is AI or Die. Let's get into the news. So any recent articles jump out to you guys? I think for me, I saw Sam Altman put out WorldCoin this week, which essentially is his approach to worldwide currency. The thing that struck me was he basically uses a bowling ball sized chrome sphere that scans your retinas like Men in Black style, and then that is your humanity ID in a way. So it scans your retinas, and then they're trying to essentially reduce the fraud that happens. So look into this chrome bowling ball, and then that is your identity for humanity, and then that is how you get a WorldCoin. So that launch, I thought that was super interesting, just starting to merge kind of like the OpenAI with a lot of the crypto news that's been happening to you. What about you guys? First, before we get into your articles, reflections on that. Would you look into a chrome bowling ball to get your identity for a WorldCoin?
It's pretty cool that it is a retina scan. I wonder how often, or how available that's going to be for people to actually use. Like, are we going to go to the bodega down the street or the corner market store and look into something? It's a whole different type of authentication piece.
Yeah.
But facial identities worked really well for the phones, so might as well go retina, I guess. But just another way for them to track and know who we are, I guess. So.
But also, what isn't Sam Altman working on? Like a currency,
I know, that just seems kind of random to me.
Yeah.
I would be really curious to understand the history of that, wanting to work on that. There's got to be a reason.
Yep.
Yep,
agreed. Kind of in a similar vein, Twitter's now X. Not sure how long that's going to stick around. They announced that they were going to rebrand, and then it's the next morning they basically said, we are X now, and this is what it is. Very interesting brand. So instead of saying, I follow LeBron James on Twitter, it's I something LeBron James on X. They're even changing the word in terms of following. It's I'm connected to or something like that too. So really changing a lot of the branding on the Twitter sphere and the Elon Musk side of things too, which is interesting. I don't know, response to X, are you excited to, instead of tweet, I don't know what the verb's
I don't even care.
Yeah.
Elon Musk really likes the letter X.
He
I wonder
does.
what is his affinity to that letter of all letters.
Right, because X turned to PayPal, X.com, but then his son
SpaceX.
has an X, SpaceX is in there as well. He has a Model X and Teslas too.
Yeah.
I don't know, something with piracy, maybe X.
I don't think I have a favorite letter. I feel like I should have a favorite letter.
X is a sweet letter.
X is a pretty
It's
cool
cool.
letter. It's symmetrical.
It's a variable, right?
All the jokesters are saying though, X is the symbol for closing a window or deleting an account or something like that. So that's where they're trying to get to. Oh yeah, X out.
Well, in AI news,
Yeah.
there was obviously a lot of conversation around responsible AI from all the big players, so OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft. They are creating the Frontier Model Forum, which basically from their definition is a frontier model is a large-scale machine learning model that exceeds the capabilities currently present in the most advanced existing models and can perform a wide variety of tasks. So they have some core objectives of the forum. Advancing AI safety research is kind of at the forefront of that. People can join the forum as well. I think it's interesting. They were obviously meeting with the White House to establish or join the forum. They've promised to establish or join the forum, which I think is a really nice marketing play for them. We'll see how practical and operational some of this stuff is. We were at the conference actually, Carol, who is on episode, I think 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So go back and take a listen to that, but she's been an AI lawyer for a while now. And, we talked a lot about operationalizing some of these policies and laws that are getting put into place. I think the forum is less so around law and more so around best practice. There's a lot of bias detection and kind of certification conversations happening around model development and deployment and usage. So that's been really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just happened, so I figured I'd bring that.
Well, I feel like the fact that they're going to the White House is finally, because like we've heard a lot about stuff coming out of the EU and other countries as well. Like, is this finally a step in the US, like taking this thing seriously and actually coming up with some sort of a central body to govern these things?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like you can put a ton of policy around it,
Sure.
but other players in the world they may not have similar restrictions or follow similar restrictions, and so there's such a delicate balance between putting policy in place and trying to enforce that and dumping a bunch of money in to enforce that versus, create kind of a reputational damage element, I guess, which larger players are definitely going to take into consideration because you can tie dollars to that. Because a lot of those organizations that I just mentioned are targeting the enterprise.
Yeah.
And so enterprises obviously have their own reputational risk at hand. One of the most interesting things that Carol and I were talking about was like, who owns the burden if something does go wrong?
Right.
So she had mentioned, if you bought a tool that's leveraging AI and there was some sort of discrimination that happened. We were using the example of these automated like candidate evaluation tools. And so, does the tool own that burden? Do they get sued or does the company get sued for using it? And on top of that, how much, there are certain laws like NYC Local Law 144, which I think we mentioned in the episode with Carol, but like they're requiring a third-party bias audit for tools like that. If you are going to be leveraging it, how much power do the companies or the users have to require these vendors to, be able to have explainability and transparency around some of the stuff. So it's just getting kind of like fuzzy, and I think the risk is too high in a lot of cases, and so companies are just like avoiding it.
Yeah. I think it's particularly interesting around like, is the onus on the tool or is it on the user or is it on the company who actually paid for the tool to use it too? Any thoughts on your side, B? Just wait to that.
Yeah, I think it's like, the airlines and the planes, right? Like there's still onus on everybody basically involved, right? When something bad happens with air travel, like I think it's a similar kind of system, right? Like if you provide it to your customers, you're somewhat on the hook. And if your customers are people who are providing it to customers, like the people like Boeing who create the planes and give them to, Southwest Airlines or whatever that may be, like it's kind of the entire value chain needs to be responsible when they bring it in to be able to like manage this effectively. I do think it's going to be very convoluted, it's going to be very complicated as far as like how they create those controls around it, but again, I'm just very happy that AI, because the nature of what AI is, has so much control up front that people are talking about and bringing, having awareness of compared to other technologies where we just kind of like started using them and then found out. We're a little bit more like, let's figure it out as we are, let's figure out how to control it as we use it. Thanks mostly to sci-fi movies. So thank you, sci-fi movies.
Yeah, and we've been using AI forever. So I think the fact that it didn't get as much hype until now, and we've got some muscle memory, some experience and exposure to some of the challenges. They're new and more more complicated now because of the techniques being used, but we have some muscle memory around what could go wrong. And so I think, that's important to keep in mind for a lot of folks, is that AI is not new. It's just that this level is different, and we're kind of crossing over that threshold where we are seeing some new challenges with it. But what I find to be very interesting is that local law that I had mentioned also requires that you let the end user know that AI is literally the key decisioning factor for whether or not you move on in the process. And I think that's very fascinating. Like, this disclaimer that is actually useful, understandable, readable by the end user, where I'm aware of what you're doing and what factors you take into consideration, because it also mentions that. So not only do you have to let them know that AI is being used to do an automated decision process, but you also have to let them know which factors about them are being taken into consideration to determine that output. I love that. I think that's great. I think every system should do that. They're also talking about watermarking, anything that is using AI, including images and video and audio somehow. So that's also interesting.
Well, it kind of starts to bridge like an interesting problem to solve from a UX standpoint in that way too, of like how intuitive are we going to make it, or how obvious are we going to make it to users related to AI is being used here? How obvious are the watermarks going to be? What are the prompts actually going to look like when they jump up in your workflow too? That I think is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and actually just got off a call talking with a data scientist about, we've been working with the client on a model that predicts issues in their supply chain, and a lot of it has been, we need people to trust this model, and in order to make them trust it, that's been like a major learning in the last release of the model. So now we're really focused on the techniques that are more explainable, but it also opens up this, like, can we tell them like the features or the factors that are going into the model? That's a big piece of explaining how this thing is coming to that result. And that's also a critical piece for the UX, for the adoption, is to have that explainability. So especially because, AI has been around for a long time, but now we're seeing it proliferate in a lot more use cases. I think we're gonna find out a lot more about like, what does it take for somebody to trust this thing? So I love the idea of watermarking, just to know and have that transparency of like what you're working with, or saying disclaimers, here is something from AI, here's what we considered. I think that makes it a lot more easy to trust and easy to understand how it's making that decision.
Yeah, it kind of forces this, it forces you to operationalize some of these responsible frameworks too. Because if that is a requirement, we now have to be very thoughtful about feature selection. You know what I mean? Whereas before it was like, well, let's just look at the statistical performance of these features and see what happens, and of course, in regulated industries, that's not the case, because they literally can't use some fields for that, or proxy attributes for things that would fall under like discrimination, like zip code or race or age. But like, it is forcing us to be maybe a little bit more thoughtful about crafting those features and the feature engineering process, because we will inevitably have to inform the end user.
I was going to say, as long as it's thought of on the front end and there's some incentive for the team, either through needing to inform the user at the end of the day, or some other motivator, whether it's a requirement or something different, of like, to include that conversation on the front end related to that.
To bring up an interesting thought there too, is like, how are we going to tell which features we're using? Because features are often transformed, they're unclear names, like, is it age, date of birth, like, is it, there's so many different ways to model something and make it very convoluted. So I wonder if that will also become like an interesting part of this problem, is like, how do we provide transparency to the features? Because I've seen feature sets that are just like crazy gobbledygook names, because the data scientist knows, but like now we have to like create a shared understanding with our users as well. So yeah, I think UX for AI is going to be really cool and interesting for the next couple of years.
I think before it might have been thought of as their own kind of private workspace in that way, but now that they're having to open this up, is like, okay, is it the same space that I'm using, but I need to be much more disciplined and clean around how I'm labeling things, or do I create a second kind of setup where the outside will have access to it too?
Yeah, at the conference we talked a lot about this user experience scenario. We talked about trust, we talked about change management, we talked about more of the softer stuff, which I know for my deep data scientist tech nerds, like, don't love that topic, or it's not as interesting to talk about, because the technical nuances are also super fun and interesting. But it is honestly the biggest challenge that I've observed in organizations to actually adopting and seeing value out of this stuff, is really some of the softer skills and softer elements, which is like, how do we get everyone to speak the same language? How do we get everyone to buy into the entire process and get them to understand what contributions they need to make during that entire process? And so I think as we're talking about UX, like this is such a different shift, because you would never talk about UX or user experience if you weren't referring to a product. And people sometimes don't see these things as products, they see them as projects. Like first do your research, then do this, then do that. And I think that's kind of a fascinating mental shift for these larger, kind of more legacy companies. I should add a caveat to that. But that's been fascinating. And I think the more you treat it like a product, the more you put, well, okay, because we have a product, a feature is explainability, and explainability might include listing out the features and the definitions of those features and the context of that within the model. And if we have to do that, then we need to have lineage in the model. And then you start getting into some of the technical like nuances, but it's kind of driven by this like overarching need to be able to incorporate different types of personas across the organization for maximum adoption.
And that's one of the, because for those who don't know, I end up doing a lot of classes with enterprises related to data and AI, and those are the biggest themes of like, how can we get folks, one, to align on terminology and just practices surrounding all the tools that we have in our infrastructure, but also help us emphasize the culture of data as a product, and people considering not only the insights that they create, whether it's a report or a dashboard or even something that's much more interactive like a story, think of that as a data product, and then also teams thinking about the ML models that they produce as a platform in a way too. And I think it's very interesting. It's something that both of you, kind of with your product background, have really been harping on over the years that I just want to shine a light on of like, guys, think of it more as a product in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting reflection too that ML ops is a big buzzword, and like it's kind of working backwards from the technical into some of these problems, because like AI product management is not as like clear outside of the big FANG tech companies, right? So it's kind of interesting that you saw these like in that ML ops space around like, we're gonna put this into production and then, oh yeah, users are gonna touch it and like, what are they gonna see when they start touching it, right, or start using it? So yeah, it's pretty interesting to think about like, compared to like software or compared to other technology paradigms, like ML ops, which is the more, heavy automation pieces or more technical aspects, is also kind of lumped in a lot of these explainability, a lot of this like end user interface pieces compared to like design or other paradigms, right? So I wonder if that will kind of shift now that we have like the technical capabilities underneath to be able to provide this to the business. Now the next couple of years will be a lot of UX, a lot of product, a lot of that kind of thinking to make these models truly successful. So that's what we see and that's what we do all the time. So I think the rest of the world will kind of catch up with that mentality too.
It is fascinating that we end up teaching like high-level concepts of ML ops in product classes.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's so interesting because I think it's where the tire meets the road. You know what I mean? It's like, how do we actually do it? And so we end up teaching things like, okay, if we're trying to calculate ROI, which actually I was at a panel yesterday and someone came up to me and was at the conference last week and was like, I loved the way you were talking about this, but how do we actually tag what people put into the model, what they get back out, if they liked it or not, if they didn't, how they adjusted it. Like there's all of these like user level metrics that we want to capture about people interfacing with these systems to try to understand performance and usability and whether or not we're achieving the user objectives with the model or the product that the model is feeding. And I just think that's fascinating because it's a lot more overhead than people think. When they think about AI, they're not really thinking about that. Yeah. And that somewhat has to do with ML ops because there's like a performance element to it. Yeah. But it is super fascinating. And now I think people are thinking of AI in the context of generative, which I have to keep telling people, generative AI is a thing inside of this massive ecosystem of AI. And it's great and it's awesome, but it's generating like new content. It's a model technique that generates new content. And in the panel yesterday, it was like the Lieutenant Governor of Ohio was putting this panel on to basically to address kind of how jobs are going to be changing and what sort of impact AI is going to have on the state of Ohio. And basically the major theme was, this is a fundamental skill that kids are going to need to learn.
Yep.
And one of the most interesting things that he brought up was, at what age do we start to expose like kids to generative
That's an
AI?
interesting topic,
And
yeah.
you know, is this more of they were calling it a tutor, but like, is it a co-pilot where you already know the information and it makes you more productive, or does it actually teach you things, and how do you trust what it's going to teach you? Because a lot of people were saying like, you can't trust it.
Yeah.
Don't let it give you information that
Yeah.
you don't already know.
Yeah.
And the other side of the coin, you know, was people saying, well, I've learned a lot by using it, and am I learning the right things? And you know, there's no guardrails yet.
Yeah, I feel like we should riff on that for a bit, because we're
Agreed. I think that's a good debate, actually.
Yeah.
'Cause, like,
I know I went all over the place on that. I ended up in a good spot.
Yeah,
but-
Yeah.
well, because like I think like so generative, like the capabilities of the LLMs, right, is like partially large language models, is this ability to generate new content, which is very transformative. It also enables this question and answer piece, right? So like Google used to let us do this too, right? Or it still does, but we were learning basically like intent-based querying of
Right.
the world's knowledge, right?
Right.
Like that was what Google kind of did like the first step in, and now ChatGPT in particular, like I love that style of the interface because I can ask it very pointed questions and it will give me resources back, right? Now the onus is on me, of course, to like either one, know to validate that, or two, I have to follow up and validate it. So the analogy I've been using is like when I was in school, it was Wikipedia, right? Like Wikipedia made so much available, helped you so much in school, but you couldn't cite it because it wasn't accurate enough, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, it's the same kind of thing of like teaching everybody, but especially younger folks, like this is the information age, this is the misinformation age, like there is so much out there, but you also have to like develop this second skill set. It's not about like looking through a library of books anymore, it's about like going to the internet and then validating what you find on the internet based on good sources, similar to like what we used to do with Wikipedia. So I think it's just a really interesting concept around like the nature of education is going to change rapidly, or really just how we learn stuff, not even the education system itself. But how can we build in the controls, the guardrails, also the skill sets to know how to validate, when to validate, what seems off, especially when we're approaching new information.
Yeah, I've heard teams refer to it as like Google Foo in terms of like how to do better Google prompts when you're searching as well.
Engineering.
Prompt engineering in that way too, but I think it's also interesting because you need to learn that ability to do your own research from an independent standpoint. Like ChatGPT, like Google, is a great front end as like a first portal into the wide-reaching data that's out there in the internet. But just because that's the first thing that it delivers back to you, or that's the thing that it shows you, doesn't mean that's a single source or that's a single truth that you should think about. Is there any tools that you guys have seen that help you double check the responses that ChatGPT gives you? Or is it really just like your keenness to do additional searching on the internet afterwards?
So one thing I'll say is I've been asking ChatGPT, can you give me sources that would be, and like, I don't know if it actually uses those sources in the previous answers, but it is able to essentially recommend sources to investigate further, essentially double check what it says. But I will say I don't actually use ChatGPT much to like find new information very much anymore, or I'll like have it point me in the right direction and then like search terms that it gives me back to go dive in deeper, right? So it does have the ability though to recommend sources, which is awesome.
Yeah. Any approaches that you've taken, or?
Well, I've just seen a lot of tools go out and make some pretty bold claims that they can, one, detect whether or not something generated was, like, detect content was generated by AI or not, which I've seen a lot of people say that we're beyond that now. Meaning they don't do that, or they haven't seen any that work well. And the second one was this read on whether or not the information coming back is accurate or factual. And we go right back into the exact problem that we had with social media. Like, people do it too. People are super inaccurate and not factual. And it doesn't help that we can create fake content. But on top of that, people are also wrong. So it's like going on Twitter for your news. You can get some news and headlines and like go in that direction, to go down a couple of rabbit holes, but people are wrong, and so are these models. And so just kind of treat it that way. Like, do you just trust a random person on Twitter? No. Or X, sorry, whatever.
Well, I think that's also the thing that people need to get through is it's not like it's a net new genius that we've never had before. It's just an organization of our humanity's thoughts that we've put on the internet so far today. So it's not like it's this new thing that is the almighty like truth compared to anything else that exists on the internet. It's again that front end in that way that just organizes some true, some false information, but it exists out there, and it organizes it to really point back to exactly what you asked it for, which helps a lot with the convenience and makes it much more approachable too.
Yeah, just another thought there too. I've been reading through a couple of books on LLMs. There's also been a lot of conversation like the MLOps/LLMOps communities around testing quality, like how do we measure these things? It's super interesting because it like gets to be subjective with text, like, summarize this page. What is a good summary? Like what pieces would I pull out? What pieces would you pull out? Like it's like going from the realm of math, which is like super objective, to the world of like liberal arts and like English reading, right, where it's more like creative or subjective. So it gives it a very interesting like philosophical point of like what is a ground truth for something that is more creative, or like what is, how do we measure the accuracy of this? I think it's a really cool problem to solve.
Yeah, I'm putting together an intro to generative AI talk. I gotta finish my slides. And it's tomorrow. But we started a generative AI meetup locally. There's another company, Mantium, who's really leading the charge here too, on creating a community. So it's been super fun. So we're on meetup number 2. But one of the slides I have in there is like context matters. And the example I give is the word queen closer to king or twin? And it depends on the context. Like, should we group queen with king or should we group queen with twin? Well, it depends on if you're talking about people, royalty, or are you talking about bed sizes?
Right, king is also a bed size.
Oh, it is.
That's right.
So maybe that's not a great example.
Maybe prince, go prince.
Prince.
Or
Good
princess.
Princess. Yes, great. I'll change it to princess, you're right.
Last
Call
time
me
I
on
got
that
into
one.
it, yeah.
But you get the concept.
Yeah.
Like, is it closer to a bed, or are we talking about royalty?
Yeah.
And so the answer could be yes for both of those. They are related, but it depends on the context. And that's why prompt engineering is so important, because your goal is to provide as much context in the prompt to guide the model to give you back what's more useful.
Yeah.
And it's not that queen isn't as related to princess as it is to twin.
Yeah.
It's just that it is if I'm asking about something different. And I think that's the way to think about these models, is you've got to be able to provide enough context for it to give you more accurate or useful information back. And so I kind of dive into that.
Which I think that's a fantastic metaphor for model development inside of organizations too, in terms of the business giving the right amount of context to that core technical team around like what we need the model to do.
Full circle.
Yeah, full circle in that way.
And then that's why I talk about a lot of the squishy stuff, or like the hard stuff with AI adoption. It's if you don't already know what you want or what your objective is, or if you don't have the context or the data to provide the context for the model, it's never going to learn the right thing, or it's never going to provide the right thing. And that's the issue that we run into. That's why people are really concerned about data quality. Well, what is quality? It's also contextual.
Right.
And we have this conversation with our customers all the time. So, I think that's one of the beautiful nuances of AI, is that there is this like fun kind of artsy element to it, or artistic element to it.
A big reason why Hollywood's on strike too, just related to
Oh
that.
yeah.
Just
That's also
because
nice.
the creative aspect and the limits that we're pushing with a lot of this generative AI that's coming out in terms of the creativity, in terms of the delivery back, but also I would argue, as we get better at prompt engineering, how creative the human is in terms of inputting and inputs and seeing what it gets back to. The speed of it, I think, really helps with the creative process in that way.
Yeah, people were a little mad because Netflix posted a $900,000 like salary AI job right when everybody's kind of like on strike to try to protect creators, writers, actors. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I want to talk about AI as it exists today.
Yeah.
The
Fair,
caveats
fair.
that it could go very, very different. Like there's a Black Mirror episode that kind of gets into this whole thing,
Fun.
and they poke fun at Netflix for it too, which is pretty awesome. But I think right now it's still like similar to like what we saw with like in music. There was like DJs that are remixing stuff and they're
Sure.
putting it together. Like the skill set went from the actual like technical like making the thing to more of that selection, the curation, like putting it in context, putting things together. I feel like there's still an opportunity for AI, or for artists with AI to be able to be more AI powered.
For sure.
Obviously, of course, there's concerns around like, can they automate the full workflow? But I do think it's a similar paradigm shift around like, there's still the ability to use it as a tool to create stuff and curate the overall kind of experience for the people who are experiencing that art, whatever it may be. Because I've been using it more and more for like creative writing.
Yeah.
And I found it more like, it's definitely not good enough yet to like fully write stuff, but it can help you brainstorm, it can help you edit, like it can really augment your workflow and save you a lot of time. So
Riffing with AI in that way.
Riffing with
It's a great like riff kind of creative side person to help you. I can't believe I just called it a person in that way too. Like that's the difference as you were talking about musicians. I think about DJs like Girl Talk who really mash together like a ton of different
Love
artists.
Girl Talk.
There's a respect to it because there's a human still behind that artist in that way. Whereas AI, I'm struggling with it right now, not thinking about it as a person, as like a being in that way, even though the interaction with it and the front ends that we've created for it feels so human, like a chat, you know, it sounds so human in that way too, which gets more.
I've never had that problem. I feel like because it's like just numbers and compute and stats in my brain at all times, I'm like, I know exactly what it's doing.
You never humanized Clippy in Microsoft Word back in the day?
No,
or like
man.
any
Oh,
of the
maybe,
chats on
maybe
AIM early
Clippy,
on? Yeah.
maybe Clippy, yeah.
Give it eyes and give it like eyelashes
Yeah,
and things
yeah.
like that. It starts to humanize it. Yeah.
anthropomorphizing it, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why they call it Anthropic for the folks at Launch Club. But
Yeah.
Oh, maybe.
yeah, no, I think it's like a person you can't annoy though, right? Like it's
Right.
that's like the good thing is you can pitch it bad ideas, you can use it for stupid questions. It's like Google, right? It's like
Yeah.
Google, but feels more real, right?
Yeah, I know that they put a lot of guardrails around these models as well. So there's still a lot of human intervention and screening and filters and things that they do to try to protect, reputation. Like it's not going to cuss you out kind of thing.
Right.
But there are ways around that with other like foundational models on how you can train on top of it. And I actually was talking to someone who's local, who was messing around with it and adding different attitudes to different chats, and it was like, the one was super sassy, like just was actually giving you some sass back.
I love that. It's like TARS from Interstellar, where it's like turn up the comedy level or like turn up the serious level too.
Yeah.
I think that should totally be a feature.
It's
like
fun.
everybody likes to interact with a different level of sass in that way.
Yeah. That's great.
So back to the debate real quick. What age do you think we should start exposing kind of education in kids to AI as a tool in that way? Like any thoughts on that? I think high school or at least 8th grade, but maybe I'm an old soul in that way. Like I think it's still such a new tool. It's hard to make wide sweeping like rules around let's do it as early as K through 4 or something like that.
If it helps, nobody on the panel had an answer.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Not a single person made a stance, said an answer. It's just, I think you'd have to look at you'd have to look at maybe some of the science behind the developmental stages of kids.
Makes sense.
And understand impression and the ability to comprehend certain concepts or like risk. And everybody has a different opinion on something like that anyway. And obviously we're not talking like policies or legal elements to that. We're talking about just like what makes sense. Because I think there is a certain element of risk that they have to be able to, that any user has to be able to comprehend when interfacing with it, especially today. Just where we're at, which I think is still pretty basic.
Very early. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we're really still early. I know it's exciting and we're making tons of progress, but like this is very basic still. So yeah, I don't know the answer to it per se. It would probably be a better suited question for somebody who understands child
psychology.
Psychology
Yeah.
or development. But
Yeah.
I'll give a bold answer. I'll
Great.
say I'm not a parent, so this is a
Yeah.
purely
Caveat,
caveat. But I feel like it's just with the rest of the internet, right? Like you would watch your kid go on the internet the first couple of times, you'd make sure they understand, like maybe there'll be like the safe search equivalents, or there'll be some good controls and guardrails around like what they're able to access. But to me, it is very much an extension of the internet, similar concerns, but it's like your phone, it's like all the other technology, right? Like you don't really
Yeah.
let them go full rampage when they're 8 years old, right? Like you put things in place to make sure that they're not going and doing anything inappropriate. Like same kind of controls you put on the rest of the internet. It's really just like the best front end or interface available for the internet, right?
I will say, I mean, if we look at precedent too, which I think is another good thing that you're bringing up, like what have we seen in terms of precedent? There's, YouTube had this problem with content exposed to children.
Yeah.
And it was actually taken to DC, right? Like there were many discussions that were happening in the political space. And they have, whenever you post something to YouTube, content to YouTube, they have, like, is this made for kids? Is this content suitable for children?
Yeah.
And then they also are doing some clever things in the back end to try to detect some of that. And they've got some parental controls in place.
Yeah.
I think what's very fascinating about these models, and I'm gonna throw Mantium's name out there again because I just love what they're doing, is like we need to be able to put some controls around the data that is being exposed to the models, that the model is being trained on, and the kinds of responses that we get back. So what I mean by that is like, how do we determine, number one, if content is child appropriate? And then the second thing to that is how do we filter these things? How do we put the right controls on these things tactically?
Yeah.
Because you grab a bunch of data, I'm drastically oversimplifying this, but you grab a bunch of language data, you put it in vector space, like make numbers out of language, basically. And then once it's in this like big ecosystem where you're creating relationships between words in number form, like how do you take some out and keep some in? You know what I mean? So like this is kind of the problem from a security standpoint that Mantium's working on, where you're able to do that. So imagine you're a company and you've got like a big knowledge repository. And of course we have roles-based access control for all of that. I can't go and see what my senior leadership would, is putting out about finances or something like that. But if you dump all of that into a vector database and you train a model on it and people can query it, what's to keep me from querying that information? And I think that's one of the challenges amongst many that companies are having about moving in this direction. How can we secure and create access controls around what you're exposed to as you're querying that model? And so I think that's really fascinating. That's something that they're working on. And I think it's relevant to this conversation with if we're going to start putting parental controls or if we're going to start putting specific filters on these things, what does that look like?
Yeah, especially for like HR, healthcare data, where only certain individuals in an organization should see it and not. Now I'm kind of wondering, are they working on how those YouTube kids, is there going to be a chat GPT for kids where it's like only the filtered information that's a front end for kids to use as well? Probably not, that's such a hairy thing to try and sign off on. But any additional thoughts, guys, on what we talked about? Because we are running up on time here, folks. Just any closing thoughts from you guys before I go ahead and wrap up?
No, it's a fun time to be in the space as always.
Agreed.
I'm happy we launched the pod. We're gonna be doing like less frequent episodes, but we'll still keep it humming along. We've got a lot going on here at AlignAI, so we're trying to stay focused on that. But yeah, it's great. I've got a lot of energy coming out of last week, and I'm excited for some of the things that we're working on right now.
Agreed. Very exciting times at AlignAI. Thank you all for listening in to episode 8, episode great of AI or Die. As always,
7, dude.
Episode 7. All right, lucky number 7. As always, you can listen or die by going to wherever you listen to your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, along with reach out to us at getalignai.com. Thank you all for listening in. We will see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.